Hello, everyone, and welcome to RBCM at Home. My name is Kim Goff, and I'm a learning program developer at the Royal BC Museum. I am located today here in my home, which, like the Royal BC Museum, is located on the territories of the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations, the Lekwungen-speaking people in Victoria, British Columbia. I want to extend my appreciation for the opportunity to live and learn on this territory. RBCM at Home started in March when our museum and archive closed due to the pandemic. It was an opportunity to talk to staff about what they were working on from home. And today's guest was my very first guest on RBCM at Home, and he showed us what was on his bookshelf. The museum has, though, since reopened, but we are continuing to offer this as a way of visiting the museum without having to travel and to share information about our staff, collections, and research. Oh, that's all I wanted to share there. And the slideshow right there. So I mentioned that Lorne was my very first presenter, and he's back with us today. And Lorne is a curator of history. Lorne's job involves researching and using the collection in order to learn more about BC's past and to use that information to inform exhibits and publications. He also directs the future growth of the collection by identifying who and what is missing. Today, Lorne is going to share what Victoria, British Columbia was like at Christmas time during Emily Carr's lifetime. And he's going to use images and stories found in our collection and perhaps beyond. Our feature exhibition, Emily Carr, Fresh Seeing, examines Emily's life in the 1910s. But Lorne, what is your time frame for today's talk? I think it's going to start maybe at the very beginning.
It'll start in 1871 with her birth, but to do that, a little bit about her parents. Before that. And it'll end in 1945 with her death.
Excellent. Well, Lorne, I know you've got some great images for us and some readings, so I'll let you get started.
Okay. And I'll go on share screen. Oh, where did it go? Ah, there it is. Is that visible to you?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay. So not all of you will know very much about Emily Carr. So first I'm going to do a PowerPoint walkthrough of things that I've learned about Emily Carr, the person and her family. And then after that, I will give you some examples from her writings of what she had to say about Christmas. But I think it's nice to get a whole context for the whole life before you listen to some boring historian reading words off a page sort of thing. I'd like to get started. And I'd also like to say, as I'm doing this, I can't really see the chat. I'm going to focus on what I'm doing. So Kim, if you could pop in if you see any questions come up, and I'll try and address them.
Absolutely, I'm on it.
Okay, and I'd also like to point out that I am not an Emily Carr specialist. I bow to India Young and to Catherine Bridge and many others who've spent months and years of their lives studying Emily Carr. If you're interested in reading a good biography, I recommend Maria Tippett's book on Emily Carr, which is a very fine scholarly work. Unfortunately, I'm working at home and the library is down at the museum, and so are the archives. So with those defensive statements, we'll get started. Wow. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples. And I feel very privileged to be living in their traditional lands and learning about the territory from them and with them. And it's a privilege to be here. I've traveled, as we were talking earlier, a little around the world, but this is such a beautiful place. I'd also like to acknowledge as a good historian that I'm not inventing an Emily Carr's Christmas talk. I found one in 1993 and I thought, oh, that's pretty good. But as you go through these things, you find someone else before that person and before that person and so forth, taking us back really to what Emily Carr had to say about Christmas. But I found this one from 1966 by Alex Merriman, and it was published on December 25th. And it was intended to be a book review of Hundreds and Thousands, which is a collection of writings from her journals. But I thought it was lovely because he had focused in on what she said about Christmas. And he pointed out that there's a world presented in the Book of Small about her views of and her experiences as a child. But there's another one of her as an older adult that focuses on her family, how supportive they are for her, and a steady loss of members of her family. And her movement more into a search for a more spiritual dimension of Christmas and her unease over growing commercialism. So I found Alex's article really nice. And that article is now, for 54 years ago. And it's a good, brief little piece. And I certainly paid a lot of attention to it. Another person who's worked on Emily Carr is Jennifer Iredale, who did the original website for Carr House, which you can visit. Kate Kerr is caring for that site at present. And there's a much bigger chronology of her life, but I've gone through it and kind of thrown out all the really important things, like when she went to Haida Gwaii and the key art gallery exhibits, because I really wanted to draw attention to where she fits in time and to her family and her travels overseas, which were very formative on her as an artist, but also took her away from her family. And I'll address that a little bit as we go through this. So she's born December 13th. She's not a Christmas baby, but it's her month in 1871. Within 9 years, she's getting her first drawing lessons, and she has a series of teachers who are very supportive. But tragedy comes in 1886 with the death of her mother when she's 13, I believe. And 2 years later, her father also passes away. So they become a family of children led by the oldest child, who's then 32. And that has a big influence, I think. The settling of the estate makes it possible for her to go and study art in San Francisco. She comes back, she teaches children's art classes. And in 1899, she's studying art in London. There is, from 1903 to 1904, an episode where she has a nervous breakdown and she's in a sanatorium in England. She comes back, she goes to France to study in 1910. And the exhibit that's on right now, which I highly recommend, focuses on the influence of all the major modern painters that she met when she was in France and how it changed how she looked at the world and the palette that she used. And then she returns first to Vancouver, tries to teach, isn't that happy. The students complain that she smokes in class and swears. And she then departs back to Victoria to home and settles into the house of all sorts, which she writes about. 1919 is a pretty sad year for her. Clara and her oldest sister, Edith, with whom she fought, both pass away. And she has some comments about that in her writings. It's very sad, taking holly and cedar branch Christmas wreaths to the cemetery with her sister. And not staying very long, but then back to the house for a more traditional Christmas. She moves several times. The death of Lizzie really hurt her. 1936 was a very bad Christmas for her. Her career is becoming more successful, but in 37, she has her first heart attack. 39, she has another heart attack. She has a major stroke in 1940, which is one of the things that turns her to writing. Trips out to go paint in the landscapes of British Columbia are out of the question with the stroke. She can't care for herself in the isolated areas she preferred. And she moves in with Alice, her sister, 41 brings the publication of Cleawick, her first successful book, which is launched in Toronto at Christmas time. And we've got an image of a display for that. She does her last sketching trip in 1942 and has a very serious heart attack and publishes a book I really recommend, The Book of Small, about her childhood. And we have extracts that I'll try and read some of those later. The publication of The House of All Sorts comes, and she dies of a fatal heart attack on March 2nd in the James Bay Inn, which is still there on Government Street, where her family home is. So, but if you know nothing about her, that's sort of a survey of her family life. This is her mother, Emily Saunders. That's her maiden name, or Emily Saunders Carr. She's about 19 years younger than her husband, and she's the mother of 9 children, 5 girls followed by 3 boys, all of whom die, which is a family tragedy, but it didn't really affect Emily, as she felt she never knew them. And a 4th boy she was very fond of, who outlived the mother. The couple met in the gold rush of San Francisco. Richard Carr came from a working class background and sought adventure at 19 and found it as an import-export merchant in San Francisco and did very, very well. And he was surprised to meet Emily and find out that she grew up only about 10 miles away from where he grew up. And they hit it off, even though there was 2 decades difference in age, and returned to England to marry. So the picture you're seeing on the right is just after, it's taken in March after their February marriage, and it's the earliest image of Emily Carr's mother I could find. Because of the loss of the boys, she has ill health from childbirth, and she doesn't really thrive when they go back to England, and he's hoping to sell 4 ships of grain, and the grain market's not very good. And he's frustrated at the lack of business opportunities, and eventually the family with 2 young girls moved to Victoria. They go around the Horn and arrive in 1863. And Richard's paying attention to another gold rush, the gold rush in British Columbia. Here's a pictures of the couple taken in 1876. In terms of the child rearing style of the parents, it's a Presbyterian household. Richard was a little frustrated. He knew he wasn't American, but he was also not comfortable when he did go back to England. So as Emily describes them, the parents were comfortable in their identity as citizens of the empire, or as a colonial family, compared to the class structures and strictures which they faced in England. It was a religious household. They were Presbyterian, but often father didn't go to the service weekly, but he did ask one of the children to recite back to him the sermon. And Emily records she wasn't very good at that. One of the other daughters went on with a strong interest in religion. This is the oldest photo I could find of the Carr house that Richard had built. It's at 207 Government Street. You can go and visit. The woman on the left may be Elizabeth, and Edith Carr is on the right. This photo is taken about 1909, and they had quite a good sized property, which they later subdivided and arranged for houses for some of the daughters. Here it is in 1939, and it's not doing as well in terms of the care of the garden. But if you're reading the Book of Small, this is the house that she's talking about. And here it is on its way in 1963 towards being an interpretive center. Now, of the 2 sisters who came out with him, with the parents to Victoria, the taller one is Edith. born in California in 1856. And it's Edith who takes over the duties running the family after the parents die. Emily, who's 17 years younger, often fought with her older sister. She never forgave her because on one of her sketching trips, she left her with her dog, who her sister thought was quite vicious. And the police were called and they came down to put down the dog. And Emily never forgave her sister for the treatment of that animal. And yet she did rush to her side when she was dying. And little Clara is the only one of 5 daughters who ever married. She married John Nichols of the Royal Engineers, and they moved to Vancouver. And after 5 children, her husband deserted her. This shocked all of the women in the Carr household. Most of them determined to never marry, and none of them did. One of the interesting pieces I picked up that I wasn't aware of is that in the original Clee-Wick, there was a discussion of how her father gave her a rather brutal description of the facts of life, and that was edited out of the manuscript, and I'm kind of curious about that in terms of the story of the household. Little Clara dies in 1919 in Vancouver, a month after Christmas. And her death really rocked Edith because those two were very close. Edith was diagnosed with cancer, and Emily suspects that the death of Clara accelerated Edith's death, which was December 11th, not, within a week of Emily Carr's birthday. So, so here's the earliest picture of Emily Carr, December 13th, 1871. She's born. We don't have an exact year, but she's 4 or 5 in this photograph. And not quite the youngest, but one of the youngest in the family. And here she is with her sisters. Emily Carr is the lower right. Clockwise from Emily, you have Alice. And Alice is the one who became the school teacher in James Bay. And that building where the school was is still in existence. You can have a look at it. Elizabeth took her father's interest in religion very seriously and memorized the Bible and wanted to be a missionary, but grew up to be a masseuse and a physiotherapist. And then we have Lizzie on a diagonal almost to Emily, and Edith. Oh yeah, and Clara. Emily's mother lost 3 boys in a row, and that really had a lot to do with her health. But Richard was her only living brother. She was very fond of him. He dies in 1899, which connects to her trips overseas to art schools. The date of these pictures are unclear, but there are notes on them from the trustee of her estate. The photographer, Helen Lowe, was here in Victoria, and the trustee thinks they may be prior to the San Francisco Art College or her studies in England. So this is Richard and his sister in 1888, 89, maybe. And I think you get a good sense of their relationship, particularly in the portrait on the right. So the 1880s are pretty tough. 1886, Emily's mother, who'd been bedridden for a couple of years, passes away. And when she dies, Richard closes all his businesses in grief and retreats into seclusion from the outside world, but not his family. And he dies within 2 years in 1886. So there's Emily, age 15, and Edith, now 32, living at home, had to manage both the family and the estate. And as I said, they clashed. I think yeah, here we are. This is probably the most famous portrait of Emily Carr. In the notes from our archives, this is taken in San Francisco the day after US Thanksgiving by a former art student who came into the classroom and asked for permission, which Emily writes, which I thought courteous. Everyone said it was the best picture of me I could ever have. I bought half a dozen from him, and I remember the polite way he asked for permission to make for himself an extra print. This is 1891 at art school in San Francisco. From 1901, in her studies in England, these are the other classic images taken for Christmas at St. Ives, England. John Douglas was the photographer. So this is Christmas 1901. And these also are in our archives. But what people more likely haven't seen is this picture. And this is what's going on at St. Ives in Cornwall in 1901, 1902. This is Emily Carr's art class. We're not sure who the teacher is, but it's one of two people that she studied with at Harbor Studios in St. Ives, Cornwall. The students are named, and there's a little notation on it showing which one's Emily, and she has her back to us, but I see she's wearing her tam o' shanter that you saw in the earlier photographs. Emily had one quirk in all three art schools. I noticed it kept cropping up. She refused to participate in nude studies where somebody poses like the woman who's dressed is posing. And she left every class where that subject was taught. From her readings, you'll hear a little bit from her descriptions of early Christmas of Lawrence Goodacre's butcher shop and the Christmas butcher displays. She was totally horrified by it. And I see modern cataloging comes into play because the subject for this, other than the name of the business, is dead animals. But she was horrified at these displays as a child when she went around with her father and he was selecting the food for Christmas. So this is Lawrence Goodacre's Queen's Market here in Victoria in 1890. She has a lot more interesting things to say in the book in small about the Christmas displays at Mr. Hibden's stationery store. We don't know, he may have supplied her with paper for her art, but certainly he supplied her for notebooks, pens, books, and so forth. And in the archives, not digitized yet, there's a lot of Carr material we really want to get digitized as a major project in the future. We have a notebook, and it's purchased in this store. And it's notated on the inside cover as a Christmas gift to Richard Carr, her father, from Emily and Alice, Christmas 1879. So this particular shop is a place she frequented, and we have many things with T.N. Hibben's brand name on them in our collections, both the archives and the history collection. And I also found a shot of the inside. You can see at the top, it says booksellers and stationers. And this is where he shopped. And this is 1891, which is interesting because that's also the time period that she's talking about in the Book of Small. So bookstore, stationer, this is where you go to buy a fine pen, which is something that she gifted, and writing utensils, inks, and so forth. So that's very much part of her Christmas shopping gift stops as later in life and as a child. I didn't find a lot of illustrations of Christmas in her drawings. They may be there, but I went through 40 or 50 of this style of drawing and found this one, Scene from a Ball, Emily Carr on the left, with two friends in their finery looking sadly at three empty chairs. Who's missing from those chairs? someone for the ball. You can see all the gaiety and the festivity going on behind. Almost looks like Chinese lanterns hanging there. But Christmas in Victoria had all the fraternal organizations put on balls for the families of members. The Navy put on one, the governor put on one, or the lieutenant governor put on one, and there's all the kinds of festivities that everybody under COVID is missing right now. We're part and parcel of celebrating the Christmas to New Year's season. Here are two classic Christmas note cards that Emily created. December, Xmas and more dinner than I can consume, even I myself. And Merry Christmas with the holly decoration. I haven't been able to track down the reference, which is from something in another one of my PowerPoints for the holly. Now, 1941, which should have been in that title, was an interesting time because it was the publication of her first book, Clee Wick. And this is a Christmas window display for the launch of her book in Toronto, in downtown Toronto. It illustrates examples of her artwork and the new publication, which was very well received. Before the book was published, it was actually a series of talks broadcast on the CBC radio. So there was a fair amount of awareness before the book came out. And here we're starting to get towards the end of her life. As I said earlier, several heart attacks and a stroke. I love this picture. It's Emily Carr with Lady June, the dog. And she's wishing Mr. Dilworth everything nice for Christmas in 1942. Lady June is actually a Christmas present. And Ira Dilworth, her literary executor, here he is with Jane, perhaps related to Lady June. I'm not sure, or renamed. I'm a little confused about that. But Carr gave Ira this puppy for Christmas in 1941. And this photograph was found in the trunk. After Emily died, her estate was literally packed in a steamer trunk and came into the archives as a donation. And Ira was alive and helped with the interpretation and the sorting of all of the photos, many of which my talk uses and came to the archives in that steamer trunk. And this is one of the last Christmas presents I'm aware of in the year just before her major heart attack. It's a Brittany salt cellar, meant to be a table piece. Fill it with salt and small spoons and put it out for dinners. It was purchased when Emily was in France, which is connected to the exhibit that's currently on. 1910 or 1911 was the best estimate, but it was a Christmas present. It was a gift in 1944 to her friend Flora Hamilton Burns. And that just gives you a little sort of sense of what we have in images from Emily Carr.
Thank you, Lorne. There's a question here.
Sure.
From Krista, and she's wondering, what shop is the stationery building now in Victoria?
I am not absolutely sure because he had 2 or 3 partners and it shifted a little bit. But I have a suspicion it's roughly where Staples Office Supply is at Fort and Blanchard, I think. Okay. But the shop in that photo, I'd have to do a little more digging to be sure where that location is.
Thank you. No, Lorne, I'm mindful of the time and it does fly. I know you have some quotes that you wanted to share. Maybe I could ask you just to pick 2 of your favorites and then we'll start to wrap up. Thank you.
Okay. This is the early, well, Victoria Christmas weather was always nippy. Generally, there was snow. We sewed presents for weeks before Christmas came: kettle holders, needle books, pen wipers, cross-stitch bookmarkers. Just before Christmas, we went out into the woods, cut down a fir tree, and brought it home so alive still that the warm house fooled it into thinking spring had come, and it breathed delicious live fir smell all over the house. We put fir and holly behind all of the pictures and on the mantelpiece everywhere. Plum puddings, which were in that little card that you saw, were dangling from under the pantry shelf by the tails of their boiling cloths. Some people make plumbings in a bowl, some use a cloth and steam them. A month ago, we'd all sat around the breakfast room table, stoning raisins while somebody read a story aloud. Everyone had given the pudding a good luck stir before it went into the bowls and was tied down and boiled for hours in the copper wash boiler, while spicy smells ran all over the house. On Christmas Day, the biggest pudding came out for the final boil before being brought to the table, with brandy fire leaping up its sides from the dish and a sprig of holly scorching and crackling on its top. Christmas Eve, Father took us into town to see the shops lit up. Every lamppost had a fir tree tied to it, not corpsey old trees, but fresh cut firs. Victoria's streets were dark. This made the shops look all the brighter, and windows were decorated with mock snow made of cotton wool and diamond dust. I could go on. Well, I mentioned the butcher's shop. It was the food shops that merry Christmas the hardest. In Mr. Saunders, the grocer's window was a real Santa Claus grinding coffee. The wheel was bigger than he was. He had a long beard and moved his hands and his head. As the wheel went round, the coffee beans went in, got ground, and came out, smell and all. In the window, all around Santa, were bonbons, cluster raisins, nuts, and candied fruit, beside long walking sticks made of peppermint candy. Next to this splendid window came Goodacre's horrible butcher shop, everything in it dead and naked. Dead geese and turkeys waggled heads down. Dead beeves, which is an archaic word for beef, cattle. Calves and pigs straddled between immense meat hooks on the walls. Naked sheep had bunches of colored paper where their heads ought to have been, and flowers and squiggles carved in the fat of their backs. And she goes on, and it gets worse. But she says, you heard no steps in the shop, only the sharpening of knives, sawing of bones, and bump, bump of the scale. Everyone was examining meat and saying compliments of the season to everyone else. Father saying, fine display, Goodacre, very fine indeed. We children rushed out and went back to Santa while Father chose his meat.
I have to say, I would like to see the trees again on downtown and all the garlands, but I'm kind of happy the meat displays have gone out of fashion.
Well, there wasn't a lot of lighting, a lot of street lighting. And also there was no refrigeration. So they wanted to, they were slaughtering specific for Christmas. And they also knew it wouldn't last unless they tried to get people to flock to their stores and purchase things. They talk a lot. She talks a lot about the Presbyterian Church sewing twigs of pine onto long strips of brown paper to put around the church windows. It was cold and badly lighted, and they all sneezed and hunted around for boards to put on their feet because underneath the church was an earth floor, and they were pricking themselves with holly and getting stuck up with pine gum. But everything unusual was fun to us children. We felt important helping to decorate the church. Present giving was only done to members in one's immediate family. Others you gave love and a card to, and kissed the people you did not usually kiss. Yeah.
That's great. Oh, Lorne, well, thank you so much for finding those quotes to illustrate some of those images that you shared. And there was images there I'd never seen before. I don't think I'd ever seen a picture of Emily Carr's mother before. That early one you showed was new to me, absolutely.
There are a couple, if we have time, there's a couple of very brief quotes taken from Hundreds and Thousands, which are a little different. They're more the mature woman talking rather than the mature woman writing as a child. She's writing as herself in the 1930s, and a few of them are really quite moving. They're much shorter than what I just read. Christmas Day, 1933. That's over with turkey and mince pie, and exchanged gifts and feasted each other and kissed all around and written and received sacks of letters. It was still night when I sat out for the cathedral's early celebrations, and it was raining hard and everywhere was dark and wet and mysterious. There is something very holy about communion before it is light, something dark and warm and mystic in the dank corners of the cathedral, the pine smell of the decorations, the scarlet of the berries, and the poinsettia's bloom. And in 35, she said, the comments get a little thinner and thinner, but in 35, she said, we have just had our present giving at Alice's, just we three old girls.
Thank you, Lorne. Yeah. I have a few comments to share with you, a few from Facebook. Mona, who's watching on Facebook, said she loved touring Emily Carr's house a few years ago. So that's lovely. Stan, also watching on Facebook, said this is a quote, my Haida peeps liked Emily. Is this a quote from Stan? Thank you, Stan. Lucille is wondering where you're reading from. So I think that the last one was from Hundreds of Thousands, but earlier, some of those pieces you gave us, that was Clewick or Book of Small?
Book of Small. Book of Small. You'll actually, if you go to that 1965 newspaper article, you'll find a mix of both. You can get to that online if you Google British colonist, which takes you to the website, and you'll find it. Well, your PowerPoint slide. I gave the date. You can go directly to it. The number 50 might not be the number on the paper. It might be the 50th frame from that newspaper in the digitization. But you'll find them in the Book of Small and Hundreds and Thousands, particularly Book of Small for the childhood ones. But I find the Hundreds and Smalls very moving because she's reflecting on Christmas. She has other comments that she makes about she's not happy with it. She doesn't like the commercialism that's coming. One of the other quotes, she wishes she could just flee into the woods the week before Christmas and hide till the week after, because she's finding what's going on in the commercialism in the 30s very frivolous and just not connecting to the things that for her matter.
Thank you. Elaine, watching on Facebook, says she remembers her dad remembers walking around Victoria with his mom and being introduced to Miss Carr and her monkey when he was little. That's a great story. I'm sure that was interesting. Linda, who's watching, would like to have a copy of your chronology of Emily's life. Linda, if you stay on after we stop recording, I'll get your email from you in the chat. We can figure that out in just a second. Some folks are saying they really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you. And Mona, who's watching, said as an artist herself, she relates to Emily, and as well as the time in which she lived and finding it so much simpler at that time. Well, I want to thank you, especially Lorne, for getting such a great presentation together for us again. Unique perspectives and stories to share. For anyone who's been joining us, our next presentation, first I'd like to say, if you joined us late or you missed something or you'd like to go back, this has been recorded and you will find it on the Royal BC Museum's YouTube channel in the next day or so. So please have a look there. You will also find more information about future at-home kids, and at-outside programs on our website. Next, unfortunately, next week, our program, which was going to be about with the author Grant Hayter-Menzies and his book Woos, had to be canceled. So our next program will not be until January 12th, but at that time, a curator from the O'Dane Gallery, Rico Watanabe, will talk to us about Emily Carr's time immediately after coming back from France. So what was she doing right after that trip? That'll be our last presentation focused on Emily Carr, as the exhibit Emily Carr Fresh Seeing will close later in January. I hope you can join us in January for our next At Home. And until then, take care of yourselves and take care of one another. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.